In January, I hope you know by now that we are pursuing different topics, different issues of real life, and seeing how our faith impacts them and how our faith helps us in practical ways move and grow through them. Last week we talked about stress. We heard Paul's lesson that a positive action is the best way to deal with negative emotion. And I know that if I were to ask any one of you who were here last week what the 3 points were from Paul, you could say them from heart, right? Right. So you would recall, for example, that one way of dealing with stress is to love gently. The next is to pray thankfully. And finally, it is to focus positively. Today, we're going to get insights not from the words of Paul, but from the story of yet another person in the Bible. This person's story, this person's name is Simon, son of Jonah, but he was also known by a nickname that Jesus gave him, namely Rocky, or the Rock, because Jesus looked at him and said, "You have the type of character upon which I can build my church." So this man who is very colorful is known as Simon, known as the Rock, but best known of all to us is the name Peter.
I don't think life is fair at times. Do you? I mean, you work hard. You put your blood and sweat into something, and you come away empty. I and my brother Andrew, we were fishermen. We had as our partners the brothers James and John, sons of Zebedee, who was also a fisherman himself. Now, we were good. We knew the Sea of Galilee. We knew its mysteries and its temperament. We knew exactly what kind of fish were there and exactly where we could find them. And we had the best equipment, the strongest nets and boats, and we knew how to steer our boats out of the squalls that would sometimes blow in out of nowhere. We were good. But sometimes, no matter how good you are, no matter how hard you try, you fail. Now, my partners, my brother and I, we always came back with fish, always. And one night, we were out fishing. By the way, we always fished at night because that way the temperatures were cooler, which allowed the fish to swim in shallower waters. We were good. So anyway, we were out fishing one night, and we cast our nets into the water, and we pulled them back in. We cast our nets and we pulled them back in again and again and over, and we came back with nothing. Nothing. Needless to say, I was amazed. I was also mad. It wasn't fair. You put your best effort into something, you've got all the skill and training in the world, you ought to succeed, you ought to be rewarded. Well, after each fishing trip, we would come back and sit on the shore and clean out our nets, and I remember sitting there with my net, pulling out seaweed and clams and shells, and I was boiling inside. I cursed that miserable sea, and I cursed my miserable life for depending on it so much. You know, when you're successful, it's easy to tolerate just about anything, but when you're unsuccessful, everything can look empty all over. Yes, I remember sitting there with my net, thinking about how lousy my whole life was. I remember something else about that morning. As we were cleaning our nets, a crowd had begun to form over on the shore. This crowd had grew bigger and bigger until finally out of the crowd walked a man that I had heard about. It was this carpenter preacher, Jesus of Nazareth. And this Jesus, he walks out of the crowd right by me over to my boat. He steps in, turns and looks at me and says, "Would you row me a little ways out so that I might speak to these people?" Well, I was in no mood to be doing anyone any favors. Believe me, I really did. I thought long and hard about what he was asking me to do. I mean, I was exhausted. The last thing I wanted to do was to get back in that stinking boat I'd been in all night. Of course, if I'd pulled in nets full of fish, it would have been very easy to oblige. It's much, much easier to be good and kind when things are going your way. Besides, this was a preacher who was asking me for help. I mean, what do preachers really know about hard work? They only work 1 day a week, right? I'm just saying. It took some strength, some nerve, but I got it up, and I spit a good long spit as I did. I dragged my weary body over to this boat, and we shoved off, and I rowed Jesus out into the water. I'm not going to lie, it was really, really hard at first. But as I rowed and steered that boat into the water, I started to feel better. Here I was doing a favor for someone else. I wasn't just thinking about myself and my own pitiful state. Of course, it would have been much, much easier to just sit there and feel sorry for myself, but I didn't. I guess in that moment I started to discover that performing a little act of kindness for someone else often is the reward in and of itself. You feel good. You're not just thinking about yourself and your own worries. Well, anyway, once Jesus and I had gotten a few yards out from shore, we stopped. He sat down in a relaxed way, and he began speaking to the crowd. And he spoke very naturally, just the way we're speaking right now. And he talked about things that I had never heard of before. He called God Abba, or Daddy. He said that God isn't way out there, but that he's right here and right here. He said that God loves it when I talk to him, when I ask him for forgiveness and for guidance. He said that God was just waiting to show his love for me and that he had great plans for me. And Jesus said all of these things with such an authority that I truly believe that he knew exactly what he was talking about. There must have been hundreds and hundreds of people on the shore that day, but I felt as though Jesus was speaking just to me. And my heart needed to hear those words. No, don't get me wrong. I still had my doubts about this preacher from Nazareth, but I cannot deny that his brief speech that day opened up a whole new world to me. And I never would have heard those words if I hadn't gotten over myself and performed that simple act of kindness. It seemed as though my failure had given me this opportunity to do what I needed to do, to hear what I really needed to hear. Well, Jesus finished, and none too soon, I might add, and we headed back to shore, and as I was pulling the boat back up into the sand, I clumsily stammered something about how I enjoyed what it was he had to say, and Jesus walked right up to me. He put his hand on my shoulder, and he had a smile on his face that looked like it was coming directly from his heart. And he said, "Put out into the deep water and let down your nets for a catch." And I said, "Ha ha ha ha! All right. What does this guy know about fishing? Huh? I mean, he may know about God, but I know about fish, and they ain't out there." But that authority with which he had preached earlier, well, it was with that same authority that he was speaking to me now. My mind said that he was crazy, but my mouth ended up saying something like, "Master," or "Sir," or "Master, we have worked all night and have caught nothing, but if you say so, we will let down our nets." In a way, I think I must have been testing Jesus a little bit. Does he really have the authority he claims to have, or is it all just smoke and mirrors? I motioned to Andrew to grab the nets, and we shoved back out and headed out. I'll never forget this experience. Just as it had felt good to row Jesus out so that he could preach, now did it feel good to be doing this, to be doing something out of the ordinary, something that required energy, something creative. It was as if Jesus was telling me that in my failure as a fisherman, not to sit and feel sorry for myself, but to go back out into the deep water. It was like he was teaching me a lesson. Don't let your failure make you small and shrivel up. Rather, allow your failure to be an opportunity to try something new, to try something daring and unconventional. So we did what Jesus said, and I could not believe what happened next. It made no sense back then. And Andrew and I, we threw our nets into the water, and these nets that had remained empty all night, these nets that we had pulled through the water with little or no resistance, well now, when we pulled them on the very first cast, they felt as though they were full of boulders. It was so many fish. I had never seen so many fish on one cast of the nets before. I had to turn and yell to John and James to get in their boat and come out here and help us haul in these fish. And as I turned, I saw Jesus standing there on the shore. He was just watching us struggle, and he had a most unusual expression on his face. An expression that seemed to say, "Now, what are you going to do?" Oh, what was I going to do indeed? I knew fish. I was shocked. I knew fish, and this shouldn't, it could not be. I was amazed. I knew people, and now who was this man, this Jesus of Nazareth? I was scared. I mean, if Jesus could make me see and feel God in ways that I had never felt before, if he could make miracles happen simply because I obeyed his commands, what was I going to do? Just go back to fishing? At that point, I just wanted Jesus to go away. That way I could go back to fishing. That way I could go back to my life the way it was and someday tell my grandkids the crazy story about the kooky guy who showed up and told some silly stories and helped us catch a bunch of fish. But he didn't go away. He just stood there on the shore. "Now, what are you going to do, Simon?" Well, I jumped out of the boat, I swam to the shore, and I fell to my knees, and I said to him, "Go away. I am a sinful man. I would be a failure if I tried to follow in your footsteps. Please go away so that I may go back to fishing." And there was a pause, and he looked down, and I looked up. And then Jesus said the words that changed my life forever. He said, "Do not be afraid. From now on, you will be catching people."